Everyone. Today I'll be discussing the issue of competency to be executed and competency in the appeals process. This is a highly complex area where psychology, law, and ethics all intersect. I'll be drawing on legal precedents, professional guidelines from forensic psychology, and a recent high-profile case, that of Ralph Menzies in Utah, to illustrate how these principles play out in practice. My presentation will cover four main areas: Supreme Court precedents shaping competency to be executed, competency issues that arise after conviction and sentencing, evaluation tools used by psychologists and psychiatrists, treatment and ethical issues with discussion of the Ralph Menzies case. By the end, I hope you'll see how these legal and psychological frameworks directly impact not only defendants, but also the professionals asked to evaluate them. The first major case is Ford v. Wainwright, 1986. Here, the Supreme Court held that the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, forbids executing a person who is insane. Justice Powell suggested that, at a minimum, an inmate must be aware of the punishment they are about to suffer and why they are to suffer it. Later, in Panetti v. Quarterman, 2007, the court expanded this. The decision clarified that simply knowing the state's reason isn't enough. The inmate must have a rational understanding of it. For example, Scott Panetti believed his execution was part of a conspiracy against his preaching, despite understanding he'd been convicted of murder. The court ruled that this delusional belief undermined his competency. Competency questions don't end at trial. After sentencing, three key issues may arise. First, there is the issue of competence to assist counsel in post-conviction proceedings. Some inmates may lack the ability to meaningfully participate in habeas corpus or appeals. Second note of importance is an inmate's competence to waive post-conviction review. Sometimes called volunteer cases, these involve inmates who give up their right to appeals. Often this decision is influenced by severe depression or irrational thinking. The final issue is the competence to be executed. This is the ultimate question when a death warrant is signed. It focuses on whether the individual understands they will be executed and why. Each of these raises unique clinical and legal challenges. When psychologists evaluate execution competence, they typically focus on three areas: awareness of punishment, that is, does the inmate understand they will be executed? Awareness of why, that is, does the inmate understand the reason for their punishment? And the ability to assist counsel, that is, can they meaningfully communicate with their attorney? Two structured tools are often used. The first is Ebert's Competency to be Executed rating instrument, which has 12 items combining legal and clinical inquiries. Legal inquiries focus on the awareness of punishment and why they are suffering the punishment, while clinical inquiries address the person's perception of reality and their motivations. While the most important aspects of competency are covered, there is no standardized question set for clinicians to reference for all 12 inquiry items. The second tool is the interview checklist for evaluations of competency for execution, which can be seen listed as Table 7.1 on this slide. This tool addresses many of the same subjects as Ebert's tool, however, it goes into greater depth and includes sample interview questions for the clinician to utilize, creating a more quantifiable and standardized approach to competency. While neither tool provides a simple numerical score, they help ensure that evaluations are systematic and cover all legally relevant domains. Competency evaluations inevitably raise ethical dilemmas. For example, should psychologists or psychiatrists treat inmates to restore them to competency if the only result will be their execution? Some argue treatment is always required if medically appropriate. Others, like Bonney, argue that it would be unethical to treat inmates who competently refuse or incompetently agree to treatment. While the argument is valid, it creates an incentive for inmates to fabricate mental illness in order to maintain incompetency to be executed. Court cases also reflect this divide. In Perry v. Louisiana, the state tried to forcibly medicate an inmate to render him competent for execution, but the Louisiana Supreme Court found this unconstitutional. In contrast, in Singleton v. Norris, the Eighth Circuit allowed involuntary medication if it was the only way to carry out a lawful death sentence. So we see a real tension between medical ethics and legal authority. Let's apply these principles to a real case. Ralph Menzies was convicted in 1988 for the brutal kidnapping and murder of Maureen Hunsaker. He spent nearly 4 decades on death row in Utah. Over the years, he filed multiple appeals, including attempts at DNA exoneration, but all were unsuccessful. What makes his case unique is his declining mental state due to dementia. 4 separate death warrants were signed, the most recent scheduled execution by firing squad in 2025. But the Utah Supreme Court stayed his execution after questions were raised about his competency. Inmates with dementia may experience lucid intervals, but also prolonged confusion and inability to comprehend their punishment. This raises difficult questions. Does temporary lucidity satisfy Ford and Panetti, or must competency be sustained? How should courts handle fluctuating cognitive states? This case illustrates how competency law intersects with aging prison populations. Many death row inmates spend decades awaiting execution, and with age comes cognitive decline, further exacerbated by the prison setting. Courts will increasingly face the challenge of evaluating dementia, Alzheimer, and other neurocognitive disorders in this context. At the same time, mental health professionals must navigate the ethics of participating in evaluations that could directly lead to execution. After reviewing the video about Ralph Menzies, discuss how you would evaluate Ralph's competency and potential recommendations to the court. In addition to probable lucid moments death row inmates may experience with Alzheimer and dementia and how that should be addressed by death warrants and court orders, also consider the following. Does he understand he is being executed, or is his memory loss too severe? Can he link the punishment to his original crime, or has dementia disrupted that rational connection? Can he communicate with counsel about appeals, or is he unable to sustain meaningful conversation? Professional guidelines stress that evaluations should focus on current functional abilities and require multiple interviews over time. The issue of competency in execution and appeals processes highlights the uneasy balance between justice, retribution, and human dignity. The Supreme Court has established that inmates must be competent to be executed, but definitions of competency have evolved over time. Psychologists use structured tools to guide evaluations, though these can't fully resolve the ethical conflicts involved. The Ralph Menzies case demonstrates the real-world challenges when mental illness or dementia complicate legal determinations. Ultimately, these cases force us to ask, does carrying out a death sentence serve justice when the inmate no longer comprehends their punishment? And what role should mental health professionals play in making that determination? Here you can see the reference I used for this presentation. Thank you for your time.